Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is another video on Express. So in my Foundations of Express video that I released pretty recently, I went over like how to set up an Express server. So again, we're using ES module syntax. So again, to use that, you do type module in your package.json, in case you didn't watch that previous video. But what happens is that when you start building your backend server, okay, you start writing a lot of routes, and all of this gets really kind of like cluttered. Okay, so you might want to have it in multiple files. Okay, so basically, typically when you're building a backend application, what you're going to do follows what's called MVC architecture: models, views, controllers. So typically that involves organizing your code into code that deals with models, the code that deals with views, and code that does with controllers, which are your routes. Okay, so generally we're going to create 3 folders. So I'm going to kill the server here, and then I'm going to make dir 3 folders: models, views, controllers. Okay, so controllers are going to be your routes. So we're going to focus on moving our routes into this controllers folder. So let's say I want to create a new file here. We're going to call this, we'll just call this main router, because this is where I'll house all my main routes. So what we do here is we're going to import Express, and actually we're going to destructure something from Express. So we're going to destructure router from Express. Oh, thank you, VS Code, for filling that in for me. Okay, we're going to import router from Express, and that's pretty much all I need right now. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do const router equals, okay, a new router. And what this does, it creates a router. And a router is kind of like a mini app object. So again, in server.js, when we create this app object, and we would register all these middleware functions with the main application object. Now imagine that that's just like one path that just kind of goes straight forward. Now what if we wanted to create a bunch of like branching paths? Each of them could get their own. What we do is we create a router, and a router is just sort of one separate chain of middleware functions that are kind of bundled together. Okay, so that way they don't all have to be bundled in app. We can create separate bundles that will trigger at different points. Okay, so that creates the router, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to default export the router. Okay, so that, let's see why it's not like that. Okay, I think it's export default, that's why. Ugh. Export default router, there we go. Okay, so now what I can do is I can import that router, and I don't want to call it router because I'm going to have many routers. So I'm going to call this one the main router from /controllers /main router.js. And since I'm using ES module syntax in Node, it's best to actually specify the name of the file extensions, like give the full file path. Like sometimes it complains because it doesn't have the file extension. So just keep that in mind. So since that was the default export, or the export default, that means, and the way basically, again, the way ES module syntax works is that when I declare a variable here, it doesn't matter what I call the variable, whatever the export default is from here, it gets stored in here. Okay. If you just do a normal, like just export, not export default, it's a little bit different, but we won't get into that now. Okay, cool. So that works for me. Okay, so now I have this router. I'm going to get rid of all these routes now. I'm going to keep the middleware, so I'm going to keep Cores and Morgan. Okay, again, Cores is for logging. Okay, I'm going to keep Cores for Cores headers. Okay, and then what happens is I can start adding more middleware. So we'll just call this routes and routers. So essentially what I usually end up doing is we create the Express application, then we create a section for middleware, or for global middleware. So this is middleware that I want run on every request. I want every request to have a log. I want every request to have the CORS headers. And then what I'm going to say, hey, if app.use, so again, I'm going to use some more middleware, but I'm going to say this middleware only for routes that start with slash. Okay, if the route starts with slash, send it to the main router. Okay, and then that works. So basically this main router is really a function that has all these routes bundled into it. So now I can go over here, the main router, and then I can write routes over here. So I can do that through like router.get, router.app, router.use, all that same stuff that you would do with app in the main file, you can now just do with the router here, but it'll only go down that one. It's like a separate pathway. So I can actually specify like middleware, like if I only wanted the core settings to be different on this cluster of routes, I can do that. So I can be like slash, so here's let's just make our root route, router.get slash rec res.json. I'm going to send the JSON response. Hello. Let's send an object. Hello world. Okay, and so see now I'm moving my routes outside of my server.js, right? Okay, so now this server.js is not getting so cluttered. Okay, and we'll just say app server listener here. Okay, and this makes it a little bit easier. And again, benefits of having your code broken up across multiple files is that one, if you're working across a team, not everyone's working in the same file, which causes like less merge conflicts when you're working through GitHub for collaboration. Yeah, and generally it's just easier to find what you need because you're not looking through like one giant file. You can find files that are organized in a way that you kind of know where the general thing you're looking for would be. I know like, hey, if I'm looking for a particular route, it's going to be somewhere in that controllers folder. Okay, so again, if I just were to go through how this would work, again, here we create the application. A request comes into our server. It would first log, then we would set the CORS headers, and then it's going to go through my router, and every request will match slash. Okay, so this is every request is going to get sent to the main router. It'll check in there to see if there's a matching route, and then it'll again keep going until it runs out of things to check. But let's run the server. So npm run dev. Okay, and let's go over here, localhost 7000. World is not defined. Oops, I did not make that a string, did I? Let's go to the main router. Yep. Well, keep forgetting to make that a string. Hello world. There we go. Let's try that again. And there we go. See, the route works. And the thing is, you can make multiple routers. So let's say I want to make routers. Let's say I were to create like a model called cats. Okay, I might want to use like MongoDB. So in that case, what I would do is, if you didn't watch my Foundations of MongoDB video, what I may want to do is install npm install mongoose. And what I might want to do is connect to Mongo. So what I'll do is in my models, okay, I'll create a new file. We'll call one file connection. This is just going to be my database connection. So I'll import mongoose from mongoose. Okay, and then I will run mongoose.connect to connect to the database. And again, if you want to know exactly what each of these lines are doing in depth, watch my Foundations of MongoDB video where I kind of walk through this more in depth. Connect to database, mongoose.connect. Put in my MongoDB URI, so that'd be like MongoDB //localhost 27017, because that's the default port for the Mongo server that I have installed on my computer. And we'll connect to a database called Practice Express. So we'll connect to that database, but of course, how do I know that we connected to the database successfully? So I'm going to set up some events. So mongoose.connection.on, and just say, hey, when the connection is open, just console log connected to MongoDB. Okay, cool. So there's my connection. So I'm connected, and what I'm going to do is now I'm going to export default that mongoose object. Because see, this object is now connected to the database. So I can export it wherever I need to use mongoose without having to reestablish the connection. Like the connection's been established. Cool. And then now if I want to create a cat model, I'll create a new file called cat.js. Just say cat.js lowercase. And then in here, I would import that mongoose object. So I would import mongoose from /connection.js. Again, since I'm using ES module syntax, do specify the file extensions. And then from there, I can create my model. So again, this goes in the models folder because the models folder is for anything to do with like your database and your data models. So the idea is all the logic for what my data models are and how I connect to my database should be in that models folder. Okay. So in this case, I'm going to sit there and say, okay, we want to create a new mongoose schema. So const cat schema. So we can define what does a cat look like. So we say mongoose.schema. Okay, and that should be like a new mongoose.schema because it's a class. And a cat is something that has a name, that's a string. And an age, that's a number. Okay, cool. So there's my schema. And then I want to create the model. So I'm going to say const cat equals mongoose.model. And mongoose.model takes in the name of the model, which will be cat, and the name of the schema, cat schema. So that creates that. And then I can export default cat. Cool. Okay, very, very nice. Okay, export default cat. So now this, I can import this cat object and I can use that to work with my database. So if I wanted to create routes to work with cat, I might want to create its own router. So I'll create cat router.js. I'll just copy over the boilerplate for the router into cat router. Okay. So same code. Then I go to server.js. I can import the cat router. Import cat router from /controllers /cat router. Again, make sure you put the file extension. And then I go back to my middleware and I can say app.use. And so if the URL starts with /cat, if it starts with /cat, then check to see if there's a match in cat router. Okay, cool. So now if I go back to my cat router, anytime we go to a /cat route, okay, so what I'll do is I'll make a route called /all. So technically, since it would only get to this router if it's /cat, technically this route's really for /cat/all. That's really what this route's for. Because you wouldn't have only gotten this far had you hit the cat router, which means you already started with /cat. So it's only checking going forward on the URL. So it's not checking that /cat again, it's checking what happens after /cat. So it's saying, hey, after /cat, if there's a /all, then run this route. And then I can, do my Mongo logic in here. So let's do that. So I'll sit there and I'll get all the cats. So we'll say, I'll make this an async function because I like using the async await syntax. So I mark the function async, so that way JavaScript knows that this is a synchronous function. And then I can say const cats equals, but I got to import the cat model so I can use it. So import cat from /models /cat.js. So I got the cat model in here and I can use it now to go get cats. So I'll say cat.find. That's a model in Mongoose to get everything. And this is, you pass it a filter object, which I'm passing an empty object because I just want all the cats. So this would get all the cats, and now I can do response.json. and just send over the cats. And again, I'm using res, not full on response, because that's how I specified it over here. Okay, which should be empty. It's just an empty array right now because I haven't made any cats yet. But just to show you, if I run the server, nodamon, actually let's just do npm run dev. Mongoose is not defined. Monogoose. Okay, so that's in connection.js. Let's go fix that. Where did I spell it wrong? Monogoose. There we go. Okay, now everything's working. Okay. Now if I head over to localhost 7000 /cat/all, see I get an empty array because that's how many cats there are. Okay, cool. Now let's just show you a basic way of creating cats. Not the proper way, but just to kind of, I don't want to go too deep down the rabbit hole right now. Let's do /cat/make. So we'll do //cat/make. So the make a cat. Okay, and the idea is we're going to expect that you're going to pass in a query. So it'll be like the name of the cat equals whatever, and we expect that you're going to make a query that says like age of the cat equals whatever. Okay, so that's going to be expected. Okay, so we're anticipating that that's going to be passed in when this route is used. So we're going to say router.get /make. Okay, and then we pass it in an async function, recres. Closing parentheses there. And that should be that. Okay, cool. So first let's get that name and age property. So what's going to happen is that const name is going to equal, in the request object, there's a property called query, which is going to equal any queries that have been added to the end of the URL. So in this case, since we have a name query, as anticipated, we can go grab that name query. So dot name, and then I can say const age equals rec dot query dot age. Okay. Now here's the thing, queries always come in as strings. So even though someone's going to put like a number here for the age of the cat, it's going to be a string. So I want to make sure that that's a number. So I'm going to use the function called parse int, which means turn that thing into a number. So that'll make sure that that's a number. And now I can create the cat. So I can say const the cat that we're going to make await, because again, anytime you do something with a database, it's asynchronous. And the whole point of async await syntax is to sit there and say, hey, I'm going to do some asynchronous things in this function. So when I do those asynchronous things, I want to pause the function. So await pauses when I do those asynchronous things. So anything with like Mongoose, API calls, these kind of things are the kind of things you want to pause. Really, how do you know which things can you use the await keyword? You'd have to read the documentation for that function. If that function returns a promise, then you can use the await keyword in front of it. But take my word for it that when you say model.create, so cat's the model in the Mongoose model and has a function called create, when I use that function, it returns a promise. So what I'm saying, I want to create a cat with this name and age that we just grabbed earlier. And then that should do the trick. That creates the cat. And then we want to res.json. We want to send the response as JSON. We send the cat as the response. Okay, and then that should do it. Let's test it out. Okay, and again, I'm using nodamon, so it's been resetting every time I make changes. So if I go over here and I go to cat.make, question mark, name equals sniffles, and age equals 7. Okay, and see, it successfully made a cat. Because see, I got the object back. I can see the ID from the database. So now if I go back to cat/all, I should actually see a cat in the array now. And look, there's sniffles in the array. Okay, so that's all you're doing. Okay, you write your routes like you would normally write your routes in Express. You're just saying, hey, this is the response. But now we're just injecting our database logic from using Mongoose in those routes when we want them to happen. Okay, so you just have to ask yourself, when you're writing a route, what do you want to happen in the route? So if you want to, is your goal to create data? Then we're gonna do something like this. Is your goal to get data? Then do something like this. But I can do anything I want in the function. There's nothing that's really connecting Express and Mongo per se. My application has established a connection to Mongoose to Mongo through the Mongoose library. And that with that Mongoose library, I've taken that connection and created a model, that's the cat thing, that describes the data that I'd like to save in the database. And I can just grab that model and just use it wherever I want to use it in my application. So I'm just pulling it into individual routes and making changes to my database. But you can see how we organize our code MVC. So see, everything that relates to like my data models is in my models folder, but all my routes are in my controllers folder, because the controllers folder is the thing that connects. It's like the air traffic controller saying, hey, you made this request, this flight's coming in, goes down this railway over here and parks in this hangar. So these routes, they're the ones that are saying, okay, hey, the front end, the view, has made a request for this data. Let me go pull the data and send it back over to our view layer. And again, I'm assuming that we're building an API. So then our view layer is like the React, the Angular, the Angular application that we're sending this JSON data to. Okay, but it doesn't have to be. You could also do what's called templating, or do server-side rendering, and you can get libraries like EJS. There's all sorts of different templating libraries. So if we were to go to npmjs.com and just look up like Express template, you're gonna find all sorts of different libraries you can use. So like this is handlebars, there's liquid, pug. Okay, these are all different templates. So let's take a look at this one. I've never used this one before, so let's try it out. Okay, the library makes it easy to use Boxwood as a view engine in Express. It handles file loading and caching out of the box. So let's try this out. I've never used Boxwood, so I don't know what the syntax is. So we may have to look that up, but let's try it out. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to install these libraries. So now we're going to show you how to like set up a view on the server. So again, there's two ways we can handle the view layer of the application. We could make an API in the back end. So our models and our controllers create the API, and our view is like the front end Vue, Angular, React, Svelte app that makes API requests. And then we're delivering data to our view layer. Or our server could generate the views natively. Like it could just sit there and actually build the HTML file on the server, which is what I'll show you right now. But again, all you care about is you're using some sort of template engine. And again, you can go to npm and just look up template engine, and there's dozens of them. All slightly different with slightly different features. We're going to try a new one that I've never used before. Okay, so let's install these libraries. npm install Boxwood and Express Boxwood. Let's take a look at how they set it up. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this to the side so I can kind of have that for reference. Head over to my server.js to configure that, because there's always some middleware you got to configure and things. Okay, so this says we need to bring in the path library from Node. That's like a Node standard library, so I'll bring that in there. Import path from path. Okay, so I'm translating it into ES6 syntax as I do it. Okay, they want me to grab just compile and escape from Boxwood. So import compile and escape. We'll see if that works. From Boxwood. Okay, I'm going to run the dev server just in case there's any errors as I do this. I can see them earlier than later. Okay, so far so good. Okay, and then const create render. Oh no. Import create render from Express Boxwood. Okay, so see, like this is again the default require syntax that comes that was like the Node bread and butter. But again, Node now has ES6 modules enabled, which I have enabled, so I'm translating everything from this syntax to that, so you can kind of see the difference and how you would do it. Okay, so that's all in there. We have an app. Okay, so we have to create, looks like we have to do this thing here. We have to create this like a render object. Okay, so let's do that. I'm just going to copy and paste this. Okay, so this will create the view engine. The view engine, when you're using templating, the view engine is going to be like the function that's going to take the string, your templates, because you're writing these like HTML like templates, and it's really just a string. And the string that is that template, the code, like your HTML code that has like special templating language in it, it takes that string and actually looks for all the templating language and then replaces it with the right stuff. That's what the view engine does. So basically it parses that template file and turns it into an HTML file. Okay. Sometimes setting up a view engine in Express for some libraries is a little bit more complicated than others. So you guys got to read the documentation for the template engine you want to use. Okay, so I'm just going to follow this and see here what it says. So compile, escape. Okay, it's saying there's some errors, but we'll come back to that. Dir name is not defined in ES module scope. This file is being treated as an ES module because it has a JS file extension. So treat it as common JS script, rename it. Dir name is not defined in ES module, yada, yada, yada. Rename it to use CJS file extension. Interesting. Okay, so it's basically saying that like this variable here may not be something I can use in when I'm using ES modules. Let's see here, compiler mod. Okay. Well, here's the thing. This path library does have some functions for getting, defining dir name with path node. Okay, so there should be a function that we can do this manually. Here we go. Do the current working directory. It works similar to the process. Current directory. Path of the folder with a node command being executed. However, the current working directory may change during the execution of the script by the usage of pros. Only case when both dir name and // give us similar results when the node is running in the same directory as the currently executing file, but produce different results when the node run from some other directory. Here's the path. Demonstrate. Okay, we'll just use this for now. Okay, because we're just building a really simple thing, so we shouldn't really run into any issues with the path. There is some functions to do all this stuff within the path library, but we can address that later. So let's see here. Does that suddenly make it happier? Okay, it looks like that kind of made it happy, but let's just read this. Okay, so we're passing in the compile and escape, which we took from the Boxwood library. Okay, so we're passing it that. Cache enabled. Okay, I guess it depends on whether that's a true or false thing. Compiler options, those are the paths. So it's just saying, hey, it's looking for in the views folder, which we created, views folder for the templates. That's fine. Globals, path, options, return, domain. Okay, I'll ignore that for now. Let's go back over here. So the next thing we need to do is we need to set the views path. Set the views path. That's like, again, where it's going to look for templates. So so kind of like there was like res.json and res.send to send a text response or send a JSON response. There's a function called res.render. And res.render, what it'll do is it'll render a template located in the folder that it's configured to look in. So we are saying, hey, we want you to look in the views folder, but I'm going to just do // instead. Okay, we'll just keep it simple. Okay, again, using that underscore dir name, or somehow figuring out the absolute path is a better way of doing it, but for now, this is fine. Okay, views that path, good. So that sets the path, that's where it's going to look for, and then we have to configure the engine. And the engine is sort of like, hey, when I find the template you want me to find, what's the function that you want me to run it against? Okay, so we're going to set the view engine. Okay, so we set the view engine. Cool. Okay, so now that's all set. Now let's see here. Do they give me any examples? You need to explicitly pass the compile method. We did that. It's been passed over here. Okay, so let's go to the Boxwood library to learn more about it. Like, how does it work? Okay, so we inject details like this. Okay, perfect. So again, you have to read up on like the particular templating library you're using to kind of see how it works. But this is really all I need. This is how you inject variables. Got it. So let's do this. I'm going to go to views. We're going to create a cheese.html. And what I'm going to do is that this is just going to be an H1. We're going to use these curly brackets to inject a variable called hello. Okay, actually we'll call the variable cheese. So the question becomes, how does it know what this variable cheese is? And where's this variable cheese coming from? It depends when we render the template. So let's make a route. I'm going to go back to my main router, and we'll create another route called cheese. Control C, router.get/cheese. But instead, I'm going to use a function called res.render. And the way res.render works, first it wants you to know which template you want to render. So I want to render the cheese template. And because I set this, so this tells it to look for an HTML file. So it's going to find the HTML file in the views folder, because we told it to look in the views folder, that has the name of cheese. And then it's going to run it against this function to get back the output. So that says, okay, look for that cheese file. Then the second argument is an object with any variables I would like to make available. So here's where I would provide the cheese variable. So I would say, hey, in this object there's a property called cheese, and we'll make it worth Gouda. And so now this object becomes available to the template, to whichever template engine you're using, and I can use those values within the template. So now, theoretically, this should work. Let's find out. Again, I've never used Boxwood before, so there might be some quirks I'm not aware of yet. Localhost 7000/cheese. Okay, so it says no default engine and no extension was provided. Okay. Let's take a look at that. Saying, but we did. So let me go back to server.js, because we definitely set the engine and stuff. Like there we set the engine, and here we set the whatnot, and theoretically, like, that's the extension. So why it does not like that? Okay, so let's see here. There's the render, and we're saying the views. Okay. And you're saying app.engine render. So let me try this. Let's make this cheese.html and see if that makes a difference. Localhost /7000/cheese. And see, now it works. Okay, so it just wanted the extension. Okay, and see, you ran it, and see, Gouda's there. So if I look at the template, it's saying cheese, but Boxwood is there to interpret this as me wanting to inject a variable cheese from the object I passed in. So those are the different ways you can send responses. But I could send, cats over. So again, I could take this database data, not only send it over as JSON, but I could also send it over to a template to render it, and then again I would put it in that object with data. But the point is, you can do that view layer in those two different ways. I could render templates on the server, or I can just deliver JSON data to a front-end application built with Vue, Angular, React, Svelte, etc. So we covered a lot in this video, so you might want to watch it a couple times to kind of absorb all of it. But we saw how we can set up routers, how we can connect Mongo, how we could and then use Mongo in our routes, which we can then take the data we get from Mongo and either deliver it as JSON with res.json or render a template in any templating language, like we did with Boxwood in this example, and pass the data onto the template and render the page render a page that way from the server. There are pros and cons to both. Okay, that's why like Next.js is such a big deal, because it kind of combines both for React, where you can do some server-side rendering with React and then some front-end rendering with React instead of having to choose between the two. But yeah, just hopefully that gives you some clarity and sort of like one way to use a couple different ways you can use Express. But it just, you just imagine what you need this thing to do for you, and you just code out that, and that's pretty much how this works. So my name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.